Hi, and welcome to a special episode of Page One. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And on Page One, we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. But as I said, this is a special episode. We're hoping to make this a series of episodes. You may have seen our drafting notes episodes where Tarek and I talked about the books that influenced us as writers, and we thought we should get that from our guests as well, and also hear about their latest books. So we're starting that, we're kicking that off with a guest who has been on the main podcast before, and in fact a Christmas special as well, and whose book Dissolution is out today at the time of recording in the US and Thursday this week in the UK, and that author is Nick Binge. Hi, Nick.
Hi, guys. Lovely to be on again.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I'm good. It's been a fun day. Book coming out in the US, so people kind of shouting about it and things, which has been cool.
Is it weird having a big US launch when you're not in the US, like kind of from afar?
I mean, like launch days and launch weeks are weird things anyway, because there's this kind of build up and anticipation to them, but you kind of discover as books come out that as an author, you don't really have anything to do with the process by that point. Like you've done all the work and you've done all the production that goes into it. And so everything else is kind of out of your hands. And so there's this weird kind of sense of anticipation and maybe a little bit of anxiety, but not really about anything in particular. Like it's going to be slightly underwhelming. It's going to be out and people can buy it. But nothing actually really happens on the day, you know, there's no fanfare or anything. So it's fine. So I'm just enjoying myself, and I've just taken the week off to have a little bit of a kind of put my feet up and not think about it too much.
So do you want to give us the pitch for Dissolution?
Yeah, sure. So Dissolution is really primarily about this lady called Maggie Webb, who's 83 years old. And she's spent the last decade caring for her elderly husband, Stanley, as Alzheimer's and memory loss is gradually erasing all the beautiful moments they created together. And it's really the loneliest she's ever felt in her life. And then this mysterious stranger named Hassan appears at her door and reveals a shocking truth, that Stanley isn't actually losing his memories. He doesn't have Alzheimer's. Someone is actively removing them from his mind in order to hide a long buried secret and prevent it from coming to light. And he says to Maggie that if she does as she's told, she might be able to reverse it. She might be able to get her husband back. And so she follows Hassan, even though he's somewhat mysterious and perhaps not to be fully trusted. And he takes her to this technology that essentially allows her to dive into her husband's memories and see them for herself and try and get to the root of what it is that was hidden all those years ago and why the memories are disappearing. But the deeper she dives, the more she unravels this mystery that seems to span centuries and different continents and all sorts of people and conspiracies. And not just memories seem to be disappearing, but perhaps more than that too. And I'm not going to give anything else away really there, but things start to get weird, and she kind of is forced to question everything that she perhaps believed, not just about her husband, but about the way that memory itself works.
Nice. It's a brilliant concept. It's very, it's so cool. It has been, I've seen it compared to a sort of Christopher Nolan type story, Inception, and you can see why those comparisons arise when you
the kind of the digging into the mind and the all of that kind of stuff. And what's fun about it is it just offers, particularly for an author like me, and we'll talk about some of these influences later on, just such an opportunity to play with kind of the things that we take for granted in kind of physical space and all of those sorts of things. Like once you go, same way with Inception, once you go inside the brain, you can start to get weird with it. You can start to play in that liminal space in a way that is perhaps not as easy to do in the real world, quote unquote. And that offers a lot of opportunities as an author to kind of muck around.
It's a great book. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think, the Chris Nolan Inception kind of cross with a kind of weird fiction like a kind of control or annihilation kind of vibes that are kind of going through. Lots of kind of metafictional stuff at points, playing with, really, really kind of fun stuff, and a lot of like you play really well with perspective at times, like the way that who's telling the story and the way the tense that you choose is like a lot of second person, a lot of like kind of interesting kind of conversations within conversations, and it's like who's telling the story and who's actually the center of this scene is very different at times. It's a really kind of really interesting combination.
Yeah, and sometimes you see the same scenes from the perspective of different characters. That's again right. Played out in slightly different ways, which was fun. But yeah, I kind of caught myself up in knots occasionally with the book. There's one scene that I remember specifically where to say it briefly, a character is telling another character about an event that happened several days ago in which she traveled however many years into her husband's memory in the past, in which she was observing a memory that she herself had of herself. And so there's all of these layers, and I was like, do I use she? Do I use you? Do I use I? I don't know sure where I am anymore.
The points I was like, I don't know how you kept that straight in your head at times, trying to keep it.
Yeah.
But it never feels confusing when you read it. It's all very kind of very clearly laid out. So that's quite well done. That must be quite difficult to do in a clear way, I imagine.
Yeah, it's tricky to put it on the page, definitely. And there were certainly moments where I had to kind of stop and go back and work out where the hell I was. I'm not really a visual person in terms of like post-it notes and graphs and timelines and stuff like that. I don't really like doing that. But with this book, I think I hit a point about halfway through where I was like, I'm going to need to sit down and sketch out a timeline, because otherwise this is going to get very quickly out of hand. And I won't be able to pull all the threads back.
Yeah. No, it reminds me a bit of what Nick Harkaway said about when he was writing Gnomon as well, when he had all these things up on his wall to try and work out. He says it almost broke his brain when he was trying to write that one. So I imagine this.
Interesting that you should mention that book.
Well, we will get to that. And why don't we, in fact, get into the books that influenced this? So we'll start with number 5.
So we'll start. So these are 5 books that have influenced both me as an author, but also influenced, I suppose, this book. So I'm actually going to start with a book that is not science fiction. I'm going to start with a fantasy book. And I'm going to start with the wonderful Ursula Le Guin. And the second book in the Earthsea series, which is The Tombs of Atuan. Which is this, if you haven't read it, you should. It's wonderful, but it's this book that's kind of the first book in the Earthsea series is all about this wizard called Ged, and it's all like the magic school and kind of all the stuff that's happening there. And then the second one just shifts to this completely new place where we get this girl who is part of this weird priest cult where they worship these things that live underground called the Nameless Ones, and they live in this labyrinth, and she goes down to kind of worship them, and eventually she finds Ged inside, and it's all about them kind of escaping and working out what they are. But I read this at quite a young age, and I think it's actually, for all your Lovecrafts and your everything like that, I think it's actually the first instance that I can describe of coming across that feeling of what is now called cosmic horror. And it's in a fantasy book, and it's just this idea. The Earthsea world is very much all the things, everything in Earthsea, every person, every rock, every plant, every animal has a name. Even the wind has a name, and if you can name it, you kind of have power over it and you have control over it. That's kind of how the magic system works. And these things that live under the earth are described as the Nameless Ones. They have no names.
I was going to say that is very Lovecraftian as a title.
Yeah, absolutely, right.
Cool.
And there's something about the depth of the kind of incomprehensibility and how they're so different, and it's impossible to understand them. That was just really terrifying to me, but really captured my imagination. and you can see a bit of that kind of feeling of kind of the unnameable cosmic horror in Dissolution,
absolutely.
as what appears to be the antagonist, certainly early on, building into it. And it's always, I don't think I'm going to be able to ever write anything without a little bit of that, without a hint of that kind of incomprehensible cosmic terror in it, because it's just, there's something about it as a concept and as an idea that really captures me. And I was trying to work out where I was first captured by it, and I do think that it was the Tombs of Atuan by Ursula Le Guin.
It's a strange thing, the whole cosmic horror thing, because I can't say that I was that aware of it, certainly not influenced by it until, I suppose, relatively recently, until, a few years ago or something. But once you start exploring that concept, and once you start getting into it, in a very Lovecraftian way, it becomes sort of all-consuming. At least it has in my case.
Yeah,
as
obsessive.
Nick knows,
yeah.
I run a Call of Cthulhu game for Nick, in fact, so he knows the levels of my obsession with it now. But no, we can see the influence of that on Dissolution. Why don't we get on to number 4?
So number 4, I knew when you asked me to pick not just books that influenced Dissolution, but just books that influenced me as an individual, I knew that I had to pick a Philip K. Dick book, and the difficulty was which one. I mean, I could easily have all 5 be Philip K. Dick books, but I was like, I need a bit of variety here, so I'm going to force myself to pick one, and I was like, do I go with... There's things in A Scanner Darkly that about kind of perspective and character and who knows what and all of that kind of stuff that I love, and there's things in Android's Dream of Electric Sheep and Valis and all of that kind of stuff. But I've settled on Time Out of Joint, which is a slightly lesser known Philip K. Dick.
I've not read that one.
It's wonderful, and it's basically set in a proper like Americana feel small US town, about this guy called Regal Gunn who just sits and like does this puzzle for the newspaper every single day, and he's actually he wins every single time, right? He's always, they send him this puzzle and he sends it off and he wins, and he lives in like his brother's attic, and like he's a bit of a weirdo, but like he just kind of gets on with his life and he's quite happy. And then just slowly the world starts to sort of disintegrate around him. He starts to hear, he builds this ham radio with like his nephew and starts to hear things that don't make any sense coming in on the radio. He starts to wonder, he starts to feel like, and I've read in places, and I can totally see it, that it was the inspiration for The Truman Show. Right. He essentially starts to feel like that the entire town is built entirely for him, and that it only exists to watch him and to keep him on track and to keep him doing the thing that he's doing, right? And it's just this, it's amazingly written. The creeping sense of dread and paranoia, I think, is just painted almost better than any other novel I've seen it done in, as the world slowly starts to kind of not disintegrate around him, but just his perception of the world just shifts and shifts and shifts. And it gives this real insight into, I think, Philip K. Dick himself, who was a paranoid schizophrenic and just had severe mental health issues, right? And you can see all of that bleeding out in Time Out of Joint, the way that he starts to become deeply paranoid and suspicious of everyone around him. And then it leads to kind of this big, weird sci-fi conclusion. But that creeping sense of unease, that sense that we live in a world where everything feels right, but then you can catch one thing that's slightly off, and it throws you. And then you can catch, like, there's a moment, I think, where really early on in the book where he goes into his bathroom to instinctively go and pull the cord to turn the light on, but there isn't a cord, it's a light switch. Right. And it's just, it just throws him. He's like, his instinct was to pull the cord, but he's like, but there's never been a cord. Why was my instinct to pull the cord? And just and it's little bits like that creeping sense of dread that I absolutely love, and I love playing with that. And I there's bits of that in Dissolution, of that kind of creep, particularly with the conversation with Hassan, of that creeping sense that like what I am being told and what I am being presented is not the whole truth. It might feel like the truth, but it's not, and there is something underneath that I'm completely missing. And yeah, I really love that, and I think Philip K. Dick does that almost better than anyone else. Probably because that was his actual lived experience of the world,
I was
right?
going to say that's the Dick stuff that I've read is he's I love him, he's fantastic, but it's very much that kind of paranoia is spot on. And I remember reading, I think it must have been A Scanner Darkly years ago, and that whole feeling of like at the end, everything just kind of depressingly it kind of seeps into it, and it's kind of this horrible sinking feeling as you're reading it, like there's just not going to end well, it's all going downhill, it's all kind of grim. Yeah, he's fantastic at that horrible clawing feeling of like the world's closing in on you.
Creeping dread. Yeah.
Creeping dread, exactly, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, number 3.
Okay, so we've had cosmic horror, we've had creeping dread. We're number 3. I'm cheating slightly here, because you told me to pick a book, but I'm picking a collection of books.
That's fair enough. I cheated in my list. So.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm picking what I'm calling the Dune Quartet, which is the first 4 books of Dune, because I didn't want to just pick Dune, for a reason, because Frank Herbert. And I read Dune again at quite a young age, and then I went on to read, Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, and then God Emperor of Dune was the one that really stuck with me, because he was the author that taught me that there are no limits to imagination in fiction, and that if you want to get really weird with it, you go and get really weird with it, because that is what Frank Herbert does as the Dune books continue. And by God Emperor of Dune, like, it is insane. There's just like giant human worm hybrid that happens to also be a god emperor. There's like clones of his old best friend that he resurrects just to kill every single day, and like people that steal people's faces, and like all sorts of nonsense happening. And I love it. I fell in love with it, and it really, content wise, I feel like I look back on that book as an inspiration when I write books, to be like, you know what? Nothing is out of bounds. There is no concept that is too absurd to put in fiction. You just have to do it right. You just have to set it up right. You can make it work. And I think Frank Herbert's imagination and like penchant for the weird, in his works is almost unparalleled of other authors that I've read.
Nice. Yeah, so we've got cosmic horror, we've got creeping dread, we've got absolute weirdness.
Yeah.
I think if people haven't read you before, then they're starting to get a feel for what sort of stories you like to write. Definitely,
it's true though.
Absolutely.
I mean, all these books are all in some ways very different. In some ways, I can see the kind of link, and I can see the link in your own books for sure. I can see those touchstones that you're talking about here. I can see them kind of bleeding into your own work. That kind of the creeping dread, the kind of like the wild imagination, all that stuff. It's definitely there, and it's kind of run through your own head onto the page, but it's all there. Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah, they're tonal touch points, I think, more than anything else, rather than content. They're just authors that I've gone, oh wow, like I didn't even know you could do that. I want to try and do that,
Yeah.
Which I think leads me really nicely to book 2, which Marco has already foreshadowed at the beginning of this, which is I picked Gnomon by Nick Harkaway, because that it was a toss up of whether I was going to pick Gnomon or House of Leaves, but maybe I'll talk about House of Leaves in another show at some point. But Gnomon is one of those books that makes you realize that there are so many different things that a novel can be. It made me reconsider what a novel was allowed to be, if that makes sense, structurally.
Yeah.
And it's got just the way that you've got narratives framed inside narratives, and you're never sure like which one is the actual narrative. And maybe that's the point, that none of them are the actual narrative, but they're all. And then the inside frames connect with the outside frames and kind of inform each other, and all of that kind of stuff. The structural ambition of that book, more than anything else, I remember reading and going, just my first impression was just like, wow. And my second one was, I want to step up a little bit as an author. I want to try and do more interesting things structurally with my work. And so absolutely Dissolution, like you already said, Tarek, is an attempt to play with structure more, and yet have things told in different, there's things told through interviews that are then framing stories that have happened in the past, and then we get different things from different perspectives, and just framing things in other things really interests me, and I think no one does that so well, and has been a real inspiration for me playing with structure a little bit more in my books.
Yeah, I love that when you find a book or an author, and it's always kind of like the right book at the right point in your life, and it does open your eyes a little bit, and you're like, oh, this is what I've never read a book that's been framed in this way or told this kind of story or this perspective, and it totally opens your eyes as to what this fiction, what the fiction can do, and those are the books that really stick with you for like decades later. You're like, I'll never forget reading that book when I was like 12 years old, whatever, and I realized, shit, this is what a book can be. That's a very exciting thing to happen, I think.
This is sudden broadening of horizons of what fiction can be, and you're like, wow, yeah,
100%.
Sure.
Okay, we've done
drum roll.
5-2. This is the big one. Number one.
This is. I mean, I haven't. Maybe you've imposed this on me now, but I haven't deliberately ordered these in terms of kind of.
I have. I'm imposing it on you.
But Marco's imposing it on me. Okay, fine. It maybe makes sense that I go with this author then. Like Philip K. Dick, I knew that I had to pick a Michael Crichton. It had to be done. And again, it was a bit of a bandying about what do I choose, but I have settled on, for the influences on my own work, I think, I've settled on Sphere.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
By Michael Crichton, which is a wonderful book. And Michael Crichton generally, like, as well, we've talked about, if we kind of take the touch points from all the other things that we've said, the cosmic horror, the creeping dread, the kind of the embracing the weird, the structural kind of ambition of doing things. I think the last thing that I always try to make my books is a thriller. I want it to be a page turner. I want you to get to the end of the chapter and be like, oh my God, I have to know what happens in the next chapter. And when I look back at my own reading, I got that from Crichton. Michael Crichton was a master particularly in his early books, at taking a really interesting speculative concept and just framing this like unput-downable thriller where every single moment you just had to come back to it because you had to find out what was going on next. And the reason I picked Sphere is because Sphere actually does a lot of the other stuff that we spoke about. The kind of Sphere is Michael Crichton's cosmic horror book, right? Mm-hmm. Sphere is his like, we've come out like the and Crichton does it a few different times, right? But the trope of a group of scientists find a thing that they probably should not find somewhere, in this case at the bottom of the ocean, and they start to investigate it and everything goes wrong for everybody, is one of my favorite tropes in fiction. That was more Ascension than Dissolution, I suppose, structurally, right? My last book. But Sphere is all about going into memories, going into imagination, people's imagination being taken over by this unnameable weird sphere that they discover. And again, just absolutely captured my mind when I read it for the first time, and I think is a good example of Crichton's just really thrilling speculative fiction. I'm just always trying to, I think I'm always trying to recreate the feeling in my own work when I'm writing, not even for another reader, just for my own work when I'm writing, when I'm sitting down and writing my own stuff. I'm trying to recreate the feeling that I had at 12 years old reading a Michael Crichton novel in my room and just staying up late at night because I couldn't put it down. Putting it down wasn't even an option, I was just, I had to know what was coming next.
I love those types of stories as well. In my list, I had a Michael Crichton in my list as well. I went with Jurassic Park, but it was difficult to choose because it is those books that make you want to keep reading, that are the special books, aren't they? They're just, there's something about them, and to be able to write fiction like that is propulsive, that is making you say one more chapter, even when it's 2 a.m. in the morning, then that's job done as far as I'm concerned as a writer.
I remember
But
reading
Michael Crichton is also like, he's an early instance, I think. Everyone talks in publishing now about high concept books, high
100%,
concept, pitchable.
100%, yeah.
Michael Crichton is the early instance of like the high concept, big idea book.
It's hard to find someone nowadays, I feel, is a kind of modern Michael Crichton. There's not that many folk
Nick
writing.
Binge.
Nick Binge, obviously. And like Blake Crouch, I guess, is maybe
Blake Crouch. I think so many of the like really pitchable ideas, I don't know, maybe they've been done. I don't like Michael Crichton was able to, like Jurassic Park. What if we brought dinosaurs back? Right, that's the pitch. That's the high concept, right? And things like Timeline. What if we went back to 13th century France? That neither of those would feel fresh anymore. Neither of those would feel new. I think there's so many books and so many stories told in the speculative space now that it's difficult to get that really what if high concept in the same
that's true, but
way.
Often what I find is as well that high concepts are funny things in the sense that when you hear them, you think, of course, that's
in a
obvious
nutshell, that's a great
brilliant idea.
Hook,
and that's what makes them brilliant. Obviously, that's why. But sometimes you're amazed that people haven't come up. You're like, surely someone's done that. But no.
And what I love about Crichton is that I remember reading The Lost World as a kid, and like there's like chapters that are he kind of breaks the rules. Like he has chapters that are like, here's an explanation of what a prion disease is, and just like kind of tells you about it. And it was terrifying because it's like a really clinical way of saying it all, and then he kind of pulls it into why this is important in the story and stuff, and it breaks the kind of rules, and it takes these concepts, these high stuff, and it does it in a really commercial way, and he's not scared about being commercial and being like, it's page turning, it's good, I want to sell copies, it's a fast paced thriller. It's even though it's kind of the concept's smart, but it's not playing it slow, or it's just, as you say, fast paced thriller stuff. Yeah, he's fantastic.
It's a slight shame that he became a climate denying nut job in his later years, but
did he?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He was before he died, he had some questionable views. But separate the work from the author.
That's right.
I mean, also was the height of being a complete nutcase.
He's earned it. He's earned his right to be an absolute. That's right.
That was a fast-paced journey through 5 books that influenced Dissolution. But Dissolution, as we say, is out this week, and there it is.
There's the cover. What's your favorite cover of the US and the UK
very
version?
Different. If you're watching it, if you're listening to this, you'll need to watch the video to see the different covers. But they are very, very different covers.
The US one's very similar to Ascension. I like the same kind of style,
color-wise. But then this is the UK one.
That's the UK one. Sorry. Oh,
this
right.
Is the
Okay.
UK one, which is
very
the
UK one's very similar to the
of. Hold on a minute.
So is that the Ascension cover for the US?
No, this is UK.
No, that's UK. Yeah. I like the symmetry that's
done.
There's a
consistency of brand there, isn't there?
There is. I feel like there's a similarity in between these two, if not quite as much. There's a
there is. Yeah,
like in vibes, in the US one. I like them both. They're doing different things. I don't have a favorite.
And very nice.
Yeah, so all very exciting then, and Dissolution out this week. But I know you, and so before we leave, do you want to let our viewers or our listeners know what else is in the pipeline from Nick Binge?
Oh, a multitude of things coming your way. I've got Extremity coming out in September with Tor, which is a kind of police procedural that goes weird. You might be surprised to hear. So that's another one out this year, and then I have 2 more out next year as well. Exhumation and Abyss. If we keep those titles aren't necessarily locked in, as far as I'm aware, but that's what I call them.
Excellent. Nice. So yeah, always more books to pick up, but that's great. And yeah, we will obviously need to get you back on in the future and learn what influenced those books as well. But for today. Thanks very much for joining us and telling us all about those books, and go and grab Dissolution now.
Absolutely.
Yes, please do. Thanks for having me, guys. It's been a pleasure as ever.
Thanks, man.
Good to see you. Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode like these ones down here.
And if you want to get in touch, you can do so by finding us on our social media platforms up here, or drop us a comment way down below there.
But otherwise, thanks for listening and join us for the next episode.
See you later.